What's up, everybody? I want to talk to you today about how to get the money to do a huge deal. And so I'm a big proponent of doing a one and done, just one massive deal, setting yourself up for a net worth of multiple millions of dollars, building a neighborhood of assisted living mansions so that you can make a huge impact and help a lot of people in your community. And a lot of times people think like, that's just not obtainable, right? That is for, the big companies, the big corporate, the REITs, the hedge funds, those kind of things. And man, that's not true. I've done it. I've done it multiple times. We're doing it across the country. How you can get all of this funding to do something big and significant and substantial. And really, I want to talk to you today about one of those components, right? There's the bank part of this, and then there's the investor part. So I want to specifically talk to you about the banking part of this. And really, what are banks looking for? If you were going to, cold call a bank and say, hey, here's what we want to do. I want to build, this mansion. It's going to look like this. And we're going to come back and build phase 2 and 3 and 4 later in the future. And you talk about, here's my pro forma numbers. Like, how are they going to actually go and value this? And how are they going to decide like, oh, are you somebody that I want to work with? Or like, just kind of blow you off and like not get back to you. Right? So let's unpack that from a bank's perspective. What does it look like? And we work with about 4 specific banks on a kind of regular basis, ourselves and our partners. And we'll go and kind of shop these loans between the different banks. And some banks are drawn to certain teams and some not quite as much. And so I want to kind of give you the bank's perspective as they're looking at these things and break that into kind of 2 sides to what the bank looks at. And we'll talk about some of these numbers and such. So first and foremost, right? Here's how this goes. It is mostly, point number 1, based on the deal. What does the deal look like? How much cash flow does the deal spit off? That's really the most important thing. And we usually go and do an SBA loan, right? Either a 7A, sometimes a 504, but I like the 7A the best. And this will allow you to build phase 1 of your neighborhood of mansions and then come back later, refinance it, and move into phase 2 and so on later on. But this is really how do I get that first loan to build 1, sometimes 2 mansions on phase 1. And so it goes back to the SBA being a small business loan, right? You have to be doing business there, which is awesome for assisted livings because we have 2 sides to our deal, right? We have the real estate play and then we have the operations company. And because we have the operations company, it allows us more banking options, specifically the SBA programs, because we have a business. And so that allows us to fund the real estate side of this and also the business side. So now we can go in just like we were, say doing a passive investment, going and building or buying or something like that. And on the passive side, we can now get the capital for that. But in addition to that, we can also get the capital for the business side of this, the operations company, the working capital, the furniture and fixture money, all of the money for pre-opening salaries and marketing dollars, and even money taking you in, usually about 6 months into the deal of operating where you have money set aside from the bank. And if you do everything well and you open on time and you get a big wait list, then you actually have a lot of extra capital that you can kind of give back to the bank and say, hey, let's take this off the note. That right there, that second part of this, the funding for business opportunities, does not come if you are just doing a passive investment kind of deal, right? Then you'd be in a different box looking at commercial loans or something to that effect. The business part of this is really, really important. And as the banks are evaluating whether to work with you or not, they're first looking at the deal, right? What does the deal look like? What does the cash flow look like? And so with our model, we're going into usually medium plus, or affluent areas of the country and doing end-of-life care. And our customers are all private pay. So that typically means we're in the $7,000 to $10,000 range. Some markets are $10,000, $12,000 range. We're in outside of Austin, and it's pushing closer to about 10,000. The markets that I've seen on the lower side are still in the 7s, right? This is an expensive product and service that we provide. So because of that, the cash flow is very, very strong, right? Even if you're in a market where, labor's our biggest expense, labor is really high, a lot of those markets have really high rents, right? We have teams in the Northeast that are pushing 11, 12,000. We have teams in the Northwest that are pushing above 12,000 into nearly $13,000 a month per resident, right? Like, you can still pay the staff there the high wages and put out really high bottom line numbers. Conservatively, I see it near the lower side, and if you're in the sevens, closer to 40,000. If you're in the $8,000 to $10,000 range, it could be 40, 50,000. If you're in that $12,000+ range, man, it gets into like the $70,000 a month of cash flow on these things. These are very, very strong, aggressive cash flow numbers. So when the bank models it out, and even if then they increase the vacancy and just kind of thin it out the deal a little bit, man, it's super, super good, right? So they're looking at these things and they're like, okay, well, I see how your numbers are very, very strong. So that's why we can come in and go into multiple markets and team up with local people there on the ground and say, okay, here's the model. We're building this exact product. We already know it costs this much, right? Plus or minus 10% for your local market. Here's what all the marketing stuff looks like, the operation stuff looks like, the licensure stuff. We can come in and say, here's this package to this bank. We have not worked in this exact city before. We might be breaking into this state for the first time, but this model is done in all of these different states, and it brings a lot of experience to the banks when you say, okay, well, here's what the actuals look like, right? I can show you all the other appraisals. I can show you the actuals from our other businesses. This is what it looks like for this model. And so if you can show numbers are super strong and here's real life, right? Like, I'm not just pulling these numbers out of my hat. Okay, here's what this looks like. Then they're like, all right, cool. Well, that's very good, right? As they are looking at these numbers, it's not just about the net profit, monthly. They're looking at the debt service coverage ratio. And so this is an important component to the bank's numbers as they're pushing this forward. So SBA, I believe internally, their program has a minimum of 1.15 debt service coverage ratio. Some banks might use that as the default. Some banks I've seen go 1.2 or 1.25. So that means, what's the mortgage payment, right? You need to have that in net profit plus usually about 25% above that, right? So if you have a mortgage of, 30 grand a month, so that would be your 30 grand plus 20% on top of that, right? What is that number? Like 6 grand or something. You need to make it minimum that number. And so a lot of times we are blowing that debt service coverage ratio out. But the exception is really two things. If you're going into a lower income market where you start getting into like the 6,000s, 6,500s, that can be challenging with what staffing costs now and what insurance and construction, all those kind of things cost. You really, to do well in this model, have to be in a market that it's got to be at least in the sevens, $7,000 a month to make these numbers work and make it pencil for the bank. You can't really do this in, hey, I'm going to charge $5,000, $6,000 a month, right? And again, that's why our niche is end of life and it is memory care. Memory care is substantially more expensive than just regular assisted living. It's at least $1,000, sometimes $2,000 more per month per resident. That doesn't really change your staffing and all those things much. It doesn't really change your expenses much, but it adds a lot to the top line, which therefore adds a lot to the bottom line and makes these numbers really, really strong for the numbers with the bank. So a cautionary tale there on getting into kind of the lower end market because it's hard to make that number work for the bank. The other cautionary tale is when you're going to build a big neighborhood and you have a very expensive piece of land, right? We're buying land, over $1 million, sometimes over $2 million for land, knowing that this is not going to be for one mansion. It's going to start for one, and then it's going to push to 2, 3, 4 mansions down over the next 10 years. And when the whole project's built out, it's aggressively strong, just crazy, crazy cash flow numbers that the bank would love. But it doesn't start that way, right? You have to buy the land, more expensive, build one mansion, normal price, and then all of the site work, utility connections, roads, all of those kind of things for usually a big piece of property, which might be 8, 10, 15 acres to put in the utilities, right? You might have to pull it real far off the road. You might have to do a lot of, drainage and earthwork and all those kind of things. And that might be, hey, here's another, 800 to 1.5 million in site work stuff. So therefore you're carrying an extra probably $2.5 million sometimes on the front side for your one mansion, which makes your cash flow really tough on one. And so you'll be building out this deal and working on your site work, and you're like, man, I got this massive deal. It's going to be amazing. That it's so strong, but it's hard to pencil in phase one. And it's hard to pencil specifically by just having one mansion, because you have all these additional costs that are really weighted for the next few buildings. So that pushed me and some of our other teams into, on phase one, building 2 mansions, right? Coming up on the first thing, instead of building 1, I built 2 right up the front, out the gate. Some of our other teams do as well, because when you buy a big deal or you develop a big, neighborhood like this, sometimes you're not going to make it on that debt service coverage ratio until you have 2 mansions throwing off twice as much cash flow, right? Now you're getting into this range of, hey, we're $100,000 or so a month of net profit, but you now have 2 million, right? You may not have a $3 to $4 million deal. Now you might have a $7 to $9 million deal that you're going in and building out in phase 1, and then again rolling that equity into phase 2 later to build more mansions on your neighborhood. So debt service coverage ratio can kind of get you on those 2 sides there, right? By either being too big or by having low income rates. The second component to what banks are looking at after they've jumped through this hurdle of, hey, does the deal and the numbers work? Who's the team, right? Who's coming in and borrowing this money? And really, most importantly, who is the guarantor on this deal? So the guarantor is any person that has more than 20% equity in the deal. And that would also include that guarantor's spouse, right? Even if your spouse is not going to be involved, you're married, they're part of the guarantor, right? They're signing on the dotted line. You might have investors coming in at 15, 19%. They are not a guarantor unless they specifically choose to be for a certain other reason. But it really means that person there, when the stuff hits the fan, they are the ones who are financially on the line for this. So the bank is going to scrutinize them a little bit more on these kind of things. So it goes back to the team, and then more specifically, who is the main partner, the guarantor in this, and what does the experience look like? So what does that look like? We've seen kind of 2 groups of people that we go and we JV with. There's one group that's more on the medical side. It's the nurse or it's the doctor. People are in home health or hospice, those kind of things, right? And they come in and they look great to the bank because they have this medical experience. They don't have necessarily the business experience, right? And that's where we come in and we say, here's the systems, here's the processes, here's our marketing team, here's our funding team, here's our construction team. Boom, like we're filling the gaps there, right? You have the guarantor and then you have the team behind them. Or it's kind of the opposite. It's somebody who is in corporate America, or maybe they have a small business. They're on, they're a teacher. There's something else that is not medical related at all, and they don't know this medical side. And we say, okay, well, you know what? It is actually a lot simpler to go and hire a manager, somebody who's a nurse, somebody who has that administrative experience running a big facility, than it is to learn all the business stuff, right? So banks, I've seen banks who have different perspectives on this. Some prefer the medical experience, some prefer the business experience, knowing that you're gonna hire in a manager that has experience on these kind of things. So that's kind of really what it looks like here, right? Who is the head of this deal, the guarantor, what's their personal experience like, and then who's behind them supporting them. And then kind of the second layer here is what's the numbers behind these teams, these guarantors, meaning what's their net worth, right? What's their personal financial statement? Are they underwater, or do they have net worth and value there? Banks are not looking for you to have multiple millions, right? You might get a $3 million loan, but that does not mean that you have to have $3 million worth of assets. If they're going to give you a $3 million loan, you need to have your stuff together. You need to have good credit, no bankruptcies, those kind of things. But that does not mean you have to be a multi-millionaire. It is very helpful if you have assets, if you have cash in the bank. It makes this process easier. You look less risky to the bank. So again, I'd say ideal team is, a husband and wife group, or 2 partners that are coming together on these kind of things. And they have some type of experience, either medical or on the business side. And usually they're able to one of them can keep their W-2 job going through that stabilization time, right? The bank's gonna wonder, hey, you know what? We're gonna build this, cool. You're gonna keep your job while we're doing this. Around the time we're open, you're gonna hire your manager, but you're probably gonna quit your job around that time so that you can work on this business. And it might take you 3-6 months to get through licensure and fill up these beds. How are you paying for your family and all those kind of things, right? I'm not lending you this money for the business side, the FF&E, the working capital, for you to give yourself a salary, during this time, right? Like I'm lending money to the business. And so it's actually a big advantage if you have one spouse that is still doing their job. They're still working. They have their W-2 or their 1099 or whatever their gig is, right? They're doing that, and that can cover your family expenses so that one of the team can go and say, okay, well, I'm going, to quit 1 or 2 months before we get our license, and I'm going to spend all of my time there building, stabilizing this operations company, and then perhaps after that, I can now pay myself a salary, right? Or perhaps in year 2, my spouse can also quit their job and work with me or something like that. But they want to see the backup plan for what do those numbers look like? How do you take care of your family during this time? So to kind of wrap this up and put it together, I have seen a lot of teams be able to go and get very large loans for this and then be able to build their first mansion, get stabilized, build out their operations company, do well, and then come back later. Usually these SBA loans, they have a 3-year prepayment penalty. So that's from even, the day you get the loan. So you still have to build the mansion and then stabilize and all those kind of things. So you only really have a year and a half after that to go, get some good tax returns and then go back to another bank. I've done this myself. I've gone to my local bank. Now I have a done new construction product that's 2 years old. I got tax returns. I have a stabilized company, and those banks that usually wouldn't give me the time of day because this is not their niche. It's too much risk when you're building new construction with a new business. Now they're like, well, there is no more new construction. There is no more new business, right? I can see you putting off all of this great cash flow. I can see the collateralization of this awesome building over here. I can see that now you have a lot of equity in this real piece of property. Well, now we're happy to give you the loan, right? And then it makes it much, much easier to go into phase 2 with a new loan, refinancing out the first, pulling equity out of the first and funding the second. Or again, you don't have to bring in additional capital. You're gonna roll the equity into phase 2. And then it's just a model of rinse and repeat, building out something big and significant, building out a neighborhood. We're going from 1 mansion to 2, from 2 to 3, from 3 to 4. And you have this longer play, right? You could sell during this play, or you can keep this thing for, again, 10 years and build out your neighborhood, right? Something real significant, worth tens of millions of dollars and a huge exit play while you're cash flowing and making a massive impact in your community. So that's what I want you to show you, right? Like, here's how pretty much normal people can do a deal like this. You're not going to come in and build a whole neighborhood worth 30 million on day 1, but you'll do it in stages over multiple years, and banks are willing and able to lend to you if you have these kind of things in a row and a team behind you to say, here is the path, here's the product, here's the service, and then we're going to copy and paste this. So if you want to learn more about what we do, you can go to the website, assistedlivingmansion.com. We scale assisted living neighborhoods across the country. We are on a mission to hit every single state, to disrupt the system, to steal as many grandmas as we can from big corporate, from the big smelly facilities that are getting horrible care in every single state, and equipping, empowering small entrepreneurship teams to make a difference in those local communities. So hit the website there. I'd love to talk to you about this. There's a free 15-minute call kind of button you can hit and see what this looks like for you. So thanks, guys. I will talk to you next time.